Hi, good evening. I'm so glad that you are joining us this evening. I know we have a lot of people on this particular event. My name is Lynn Bader. I'm executive producer at WNED PBS, part of Buffalo Toronto Public Media. I'm here this evening with Robert Roush. I will introduce you officially in just a moment. But I want to let you know that tonight's event is part of our WBFO Mental Health Initiative. And really, that's been a 2-year project where we've done in-depth reporting to try to destigmatize mental health and issues around that. Our initiative has been funded by the Patrick P. Lee Foundation, and their generous support has really allowed Buffalo Toronto Public Media and WBFO in particular to spend the time and the resources to find the stories that need to be told, bring this out of the shadows, issues around mental health, and address it from a wide variety of angles. And that's one of the reasons that we are here tonight. We are talking about the LGBTQ community. And, I have to tell you that I am a proud member of the LGBTQ community. And so it just really warms my heart to be here this evening because, Robert, I don't know about you, but I came out when I was 27 years old. And it was back in 1996. And I'll tell you, the idea of coming out as a teenager back then, impossible. You just didn't do it. There was so much shame around it, so much misunderstanding around it. And, it definitely has had an impact on my mental health and my life. And I was hoping that by the time I was like our age, that this wouldn't even be an issue for our youth. And yet it is. And so tonight, I want you to be a part of this conversation. I want you to engage. We have a great panel lined up that Robert's going to tell you about, but we would like you to put your comments and your questions in the chat, and we will get to as many of them as we can. So I am joined here by Robert Roush, good friend of mine now, and he is the executive director of GLYS, Western New York. Robert, tell us what GLYS stands for, and then I will let you take it away.
Hi, thank you so much, Lynn. GLYS stands for Growing LGBTQ plus Youth Support. We kept our acronym and we changed it to that slogan because it really wasn't inclusive of all of the members of our community. One of the things I want to say about GLYS is that we are 38 years old and we are owned and operated by LGBTQ plus people, our board of directors, our staff, almost all exclusively identify as LGBTQ plus. And that allows us to give our youth community, and it allows us as LGBTQ plus community members who are elders to share with them our lived experience.
I guess we are elders now.
We are fortunately or unfortunately elders at this point. But while GLYS does not offer actual clinical services, we have assembled a panel here this evening of 2 clinicians and a parent and some LGBTQ youth as well, who can help us kind of navigate what this whole mental health landscape is for our youth.
Before you go on, I do want to just clarify that identifying as LGBTQ is not a mental illness, hasn't been designated as one for nearly 50 years. So right up front, I think it's really important to just make that clear. But I think in terms of your mental health, identifying as LGBTQ does have some challenges in life, and that's what we're going to talk about.
That's right. Lynn, you and I were born into a world where it was considered a mental illness.
That's right.
And that changed during our lifetimes. So this is a more recent phenomena that we have services that are really geared towards and evidence-based to help our youth. LGBTQ plus people have all suffered various trauma throughout their lives, which have influenced their mental health. These traumas include being ostracized by society, families, and institutions such as religions, employers, and schools. They include being verbally assaulted, being a bystander while others denigrate LGBTQ plus identities, being physically assaulted, losing employment, losing housing, and even being forced into reparative therapies, so-called reparative therapies that make them straight. None of this has removed the LGBTQ plus identity from society. More recently, no, as I mentioned, the mental health field has offered affirming care to those with such an identity. On that backdrop, we offer some questions and discussion about mental health for LGBTQ plus youth. So we're going to start with this whole concept of stress, because everyone, I don't know how many people are watching, 300-400 people, everyone knows what stress is. Everyone has experienced stress. It's a part of life. No matter what age we are, we all feel this stress. And for young people in general, there can be stress at home, stress at school, and in youth social groups. When we examine stress through the lens of young person exploring gender identity, gender expression, or sexuality, it adds a whole new layer of stressors. So let's talk specifically about those stressors and what they look like. And let's look at ways young people can manage those stressors. So I'm going to ask the panelists what they have encountered as far as stress and seeing stress in LGBTQ plus youth. And let's start with Vivian for that.
Hi,
Vivian, welcome.
having me.
Yes.
Thank
And
you.
Please introduce yourself.
Well, my name is Vivian Logan. I'm a licensed master social worker and outreach engagement specialist for Horizon Health Services Bailey Clinic. So I'm very excited to be here. When we talk about stress, we have to remember that even as adults, stress manifests itself in our lives in many different ways. It could be physically, mentally, and emotionally. And with our LGBTQ youth, they experience trauma and stress at higher rates than their straight peers. And that's something that we should keep in mind. Common traumas, as Robert said, experienced by these youth include bullying, harassment, traumatic loss, intimate partner violence, physical and sexual abuse, and trauma in forms of societal stigma, bias, and rejection. Now, one of the things that I would like to stress is that these youth develop and persist. The reactions to the stress develop and persist and affect their lives on a daily basis, long after the traumatic event has ended. And so one of the things that I encourage parents and caregivers and educators, tune into your youth population who are around you. Become more aware of what their typical behavior is, because the stress reaction is going to be a little bit different. And it's a variety of responses, and these include intense and ongoing emotional upset, depressive symptoms or anxiety, behavior changes. We go from someone who was outgoing to now that they're a little bit more withdrawn. Difficulties with self-regulation, controlling their emotions, problems relating to others or forming attachments, regression or loss of previously acquired skills, attention and academic difficulties. The child who excelled as a student grades may plummet, and nobody knows the reason why. Nightmares, difficulty sleeping, eating, and physical symptoms such as aches and pains, headaches, stomach aches, those kind of pains. Now, our older youth may start self-medicating, using drugs or alcohol to deal with their symptoms of stress. And some may even behave in risky ways or engage in unhealthy behaviors. And so, result of the stress that they've encountered.
Yeah, thank you, Vivian. Andy, what do you have to add to that? What are you seeing in practice?
Thank you, Robert and Lynn.
Oh, and introduce yourself
Yes,
too,
and
please.
Introduce yourself. Thank you.
My name is Andy Binner. I'm in private practice here in Buffalo, New York. I've been in the fields of mental health for almost 30 years. And in that comes privilege at this point, in that by being in private practice, I'm able to come out and say things like, when I was 21, I came out as bi in college to a friend of mine at the radio station that we worked at or volunteered at in college, right? If I had not come out to that person the day I did, I don't know if I would be here. And that was at 21 years old. And then again, having the privilege of working at certain places, I got to come out again and say at a workplace, I think it was Buffalo State College, I came out and said, hey, I think maybe I might identify as pan, where sometimes my head looks this way, sometimes my head looks this way. Sometimes this person's brain is just so beautiful. I just want to hear and listen to them talk more. Identifying now as non-binary, as neurodivergent, these are all things that I had so much internalized shame about. That something was wrong with me, gaslighting myself, if you will, going back to the 30s and that famous black and white film. These are the things I see with the kiddos and adults that I work with. And I see kids as young as age 3 that come to me and say, I know that doctor said I'm a boy, but I am not. I am a girl. And this is my name. And kids that I see, they know who they are. And my job is to affirm that. Because the bullying that they experience, the internalized, as well as Vivian pointed out, the stress that they go through is so much greater than their same age cohorts that don't identify as queer, or as maybe not from the same class, maybe not the same race. All these stressors accumulate, and it's multi-generational.
One of the things that I was just thinking about, Robert, as Andy was answering that question, is you brought some statistics with you. So when we talk about that stress and it's not addressed and it's not dealt with, we're looking at, we're entering in dangerous territory.
We are. So, and Andy, thank you so much, because I think your sharing and your lived experience is really resonating with, I don't know how many people, but it really resonated with me. But, if we're talking about suicide rates, which is a tough subject, but according to the New York State LGBT Health and Human Services Network, LGBTQ plus youth are 2.5 times more likely to self-harm after experiencing verbal and physical assault. These youth, when rejected by their family, are 8 times more likely to attempt suicide. 82% of transgender and gender nonconforming youth seriously considered killing themselves. These rates are all higher for people of color. In Western New York, the Child Psychiatric Center reports to GLYS that up to 80% of the adolescents in their inpatient facility identify as LGBTQ plus. So how can parents or caregivers help? And I think we're going to go to Jennifer for this, and Jennifer and maybe Rin and Allie can talk too about their experiences.
So I'm Jennifer Perrick. I am the parent of these 2 lovely humans. This is Rin. They use they, them pronouns and are non-binary. And this is my daughter, Allie, who uses she, her pronouns. So Remind me again, Robert, exactly what your question was. We were having a moment here because your statistics were really hitting home.
They really are kind of stunning. So we're kind of saying, like, how have you helped your kids navigating some of this stuff, and what are some things that parents can do to help?
Well, I know, being a licensed psychologist, I was well aware of the statistics that you just quoted, as well as our own family history of mental illness, and knowing that the genetics were stacked against my kiddos in terms of not experiencing mental illness, however they grew up and identified. That when Rin came out at 11, I went, okay, I know there's lots of things that cause bad outcomes. There's not as much research on resilience and what causes good outcomes. So I'm just going to do the opposite of what causes all the bad stuff.
Wow.
And the opposite of that is radical acceptance.
It's decent parenting.
So
parenting.
I am actually going to let the kids chime in and tell what they find most helpful.
Hello, I'm Rin. If you see my tics go off, it's because I'm mentally ill. Yay. I myself, like Mama said, I came out small child. I was in 6th grade and also very impatient. I figured things out, and then the next week came out. I would have done it earlier, but we were on winter break.
What does mom do?
Okay, so I have struggled with all of these problems because I am just amazing that way. I am open about my problems because I feel comfortable in my household telling people that, even if I can't do it in the moment when I'm having an episode. And afterwards, people understand. We go and we sit down and we watch comfort things. We'll eat good food. We'll make sure everybody's okay and taken care of. And we ask if we can help. And if people are still feeling stressed, we just leave the problem alone for a little bit and take care of everybody.
So nothing's off the table when it comes to what we talk about in our house. We've talked contraception over the dinner table. We've talked.
I got a stick in my arm.
There's no topic that's taboo. If somebody has a question about it, we answer it. It doesn't matter what the age is. We'll come up with an age appropriate answer. But
oh yeah, that's been really helpful. Our old church did a program where we had like consent talks and like the science, the simplified science stuff of having a kid. It was like very useful, and it's one of my favorite things that we've done. And just like, hi, I learned sex ed at age 6. How's your life?
The Unitarian Universalist and United Church of Christ will often teach the Our Whole Lives comprehensive sex ed curriculum that's much more in-depth than what you'll get in public school, and it has age-appropriate lessons that can start from kindergarten and age 1, like what are your body parts and who should be allowed to touch them, up through what the teenagers go through, the 7th to 9th graders, in terms of comprehensive sex ed. But I will also let Allie chime in with what is helpful.
For me, oftentimes what is helpful is just being able to talk to someone and know I can say whatever I'm feeling, no matter how distressing it is, because I know I'm supported and I'm cared about. And I think giving kids, especially ones who have identities that will expose them to greater stress than some of their peers, it is important for them to know they have a home base to go back to. It may not be home, like the place they live, but they have somewhere and they have someone who cares about them unconditionally and who will support them no matter what happens to them, and who will care. And so they know they have somewhere where they can be safe, because I think that makes it a little easier to be brave, because if something goes wrong, then you have somewhere to go back to.
So, George Hampton, I'm just going to read this here on YouTube, says acceptance is the biggest thing, right? So he is affirming what you're saying. My kid came out in his early 20s. The fact that I have an awesome kid did not change one bit. Also, listening and understanding is important.
It's so it's so simple that it is not, almost.
Right.
And one of the things we always do at GLYS when parents call to talk to us, it's really hard for them to reach out and talk to us. And I always say, here's the first thing I know, because you called, you really love your child. And so if you really love your children, you can make mistakes and your kids will get it.
Yeah.
And then you can, correct those mistakes. You can fix things. You can move on. If you're coming from a place of love, it's really super important. And we also heard listen, 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 and listen some more.
Right.
And we also heard that radical acceptance, that kind of like, wow, I've never heard this before, but it's probably okay.
Yeah.
And then think about how is that, excuse me, how is that okay? And you can come up with so many reasons, because again, a lot of the reason for being our true selves is love and how we love.
Right. I think the other thing that I would add to that is, if you're a parent and your child has come out to you, or you're wondering about it and you're unsure and you're unclear, but like Robert just said, you love your child, think about it this way. It's a process and a path, right? It's one step at a time, and your child may be further along on that path than you are. Exactly. But your child understands that it's a process and a path too. And it's about, meeting your child where they are, I would imagine, nobody, you don't discover overnight, Rin, you're probably, I'm sort of the opposite of a regular case that says,
Look,
boy, I'm wondering about this. So good for you. Good on you. But I think that for a lot of kids, it is a longer process.
Yeah, I think it is. And, Lynn, I think maybe now would be a good time to mention some of the elephants in the room.
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
All right.
So there are things that sometimes we avoid talking about, but we're not going to avoid talking about them tonight.
Okay.
Accessibility to mental health care is a really huge issue. And there are some things that stand in the way of accessibility to that health care. And those things can be religion, they can be race, they can be ethnically based, and all of these can contribute negatively to one's mental health. We know that these things lead to higher rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide. So what is a young person to do when they encounter negativity from one of these groups? And Andy, I'm wondering if you can kind of give us some pointers about that.
About what a young person could do?
Encountering negativity, like religious negativity. We've all been told you're going to go to hell. How should someone respond to that?
I'm having a memory of being partially raised in the Armenian church in Niagara Falls. So although my dad was very generous with his German skin tone, which I turn into basically one freckle, hearing things about gender, about girls should be with boys, was really hard. at a young age to hear. And again, like Lynn was saying, there wasn't that platform to say, it's okay to be your authentic self, because now there's this, you're going to hell. And although I identify strongly with that Armenian part of me, I don't identify with, I can't swear on here, I presume. The FCC, with
Avoid it if you can help it.
with nonsense, the nonsense, the foolishness, to quote Niecy Nash. It's not okay. It's not okay to put those things on others, to other someone. The job is to help everyone be seen and heard and feel like they're seen and heard. Like even earlier, Rin was trying to say something and then someone accidentally talked over Rin, and I was like, oh, I want to hear what Rin has to say. These are things that we can do to reach out and say, you're valid, your experience matters. And what's said in religion, what's said by the church, what's said by culture. My own child, I'm raising an African-American child, African and Native American, who was adopted at birth. And one day we were going out with the Rainbows Senior Visible and Proud group, and my son told my friend James, oh, my name is CJ. And I went, And so we had a chat. I'm like, do we need to do puberty blockers? Do we need to do this? Like, all of a sudden there was this like, okay, this is a conversation that needs to happen like right now before it's too late. So this child can have a choice. And he said, no, I just like that girls get to have more feelings. They get to be more than just angry or happy. And, you know, it was like, I'm learning about toxic masculinity from a 10-year-old. Wow. Like, he's already taken that in. It's embedded in the soil and he's taken that in. These are like Jennifer said, you know, do the opposite of sometimes, because what we've tried in the past hasn't worked so well.
So let's hear from Rin and Allie about like meeting that negativity. What do you hear in school? You know, like, how do you respond to that?
Well, recently, me and two other visually queer people got the, like, I'm gonna ask you out as a joke prank. Lovely. Definitely great. In the moment, because I take a while to process things, we laugh at it because it's really funny. Part of it is really funny that they think that's okay and that, like, they're actually trying that. The other part is an hour later when it hits and I go to administration, where my school actually has great administration and they're willing to, you know, put in the effort. And also, like, sarcasm is such a good tool. Like, go to hell. Cool, I'll see you there.
It takes the power out of the person.
Yeah, wow, those kind of defense things. So
Allie, it's harder to hear Allie.
I'm
she's
sorry.
Further away from the computer.
Yeah,
but Allie, you were saying something really interesting.
When Rin made the comment about sarcasm being a good tool, I was saying it takes the power out of the hands of the person who is trying to hurt you, and it puts it back indoors, because you're saying, I hear what you're saying, but I don't care at all.
Narrate what they're doing as a game show host who's really not into whatever the player's doing.
And as
Good point.
hear anything much at school, because my identity, I'm much more quiet than Rin, and my identity is much less known. as a thing, but I definitely absorbed a lot of the humans have sex kind of thing. And I was always, I don't want that. And I think for me, what I did was, thanks to my mom, because I knew everyone's an individual, I just went, okay, that's whoever's saying that, that's their reality, but it's not mine. So I think teaching kids to be able to say, that's your reality, but it's not mine, and that's okay, is very important, because it allows them to let other people be however they are, but also know that whoever they are is who they are, and they shouldn't need to change it.
Mm-hmm.
Also, going back to the earlier point that Andy said they wanted to hear me talk about, it's a very quick anecdote. I didn't just like have a sudden realization and come out. I had like this whole process. I just found a word and then started everything. Because once I found a word and it had a definition, and that definition was me, then I did everything. I did a hell of a lot of research. Never underestimate a hyper focus on trying to figure out your own identity.
There was a year of very secretive YouTube watching, and what are you watching? A video. Do you want to tell me about it? No.
Nope.
Look, my family, the best family, one of the only healthy families I know of. And I still felt uncomfortable because of society's crap.
Well, you bring up a really good point. I mean, you bring up a very good point. We have a comment here as I'm looking at the chat that says, I've never questioned my mom's love for me, but she came from a place of fear when I came out at 16. And so sometimes you can feel like your family loves you, but this is not something to be feared. So if you're a parent, and we understand that it's rooted in us very deeply, and that may be your first reaction, but let it not be your last reaction.
Exactly.
That is so important and so true. And, back in the 1980s, and one of the main reasons GLYS started, it was really beginning to be the height of the AIDS crisis. So if a young person assigned male at birth came out to their family and said that they were gay, they were often just rejected from the family and they were thrown out of the house. And that was a huge fear reaction. And it was a fear reaction because of AIDS. And then there were youth on the street, and that's why GLYS was founded, to help those youth, to bring them back and off the street, and maybe find families for them where they could find the love and support that they needed. So that fear reaction is real. Families experience it all the time. It's okay to feel that way. It's okay for parents to feel that way, and you have to feel the feeling, and you have to actually complete feeling the feeling. You can't push it away. And I'm wondering if maybe Vivian can kind of talk about that sort of thing a little bit.
Yes, oftentimes, and I think Lynn mentioned this from the very beginning, when parents call and their child has just begun to talk about their identity and wanting to be their authentic self and what have you. Well, I've had parents call and say, my child needs counseling. And so after we process, I'm wondering, having to ask, well, why do you feel they need counseling? And so after explaining this is not a mental illness or what have you, but actually allowing them, like you said, to have that fear. And we often sometimes we fear one another. Okay. We fear what we don't know. And so it's all about helping parents to become more aware, becoming more aware of the developmental stages, becoming more aware of what they're feeling so they can process their feelings, so they can understand and help their children. Like Ren and Allie said, engage in good parenting, to be able to hear the conversation honestly and to give their kids an honest answer if they don't know, to be able to say, I don't know, but let me get back to you. And as they become aware and go through this process, with their kids. Every parent is not going to be a Jennifer, unfortunately. However, every parent can strive to become more aware, more empathetic. And so to help support their kids. And that's what's really important. And oftentimes just hearing what your child has to say and allowing them to feel supported, I think is very, very critical.
Yeah, let's maybe drill into this a little
Sure.
bit more deeply for the parents and like what the parents might be able to do. So, long before young people do think about their sexual orientation, and back when we were young, that was like the only thing. You kind of like reached adolescence, and then you started talking about your sexuality. But long before that, now youth are thinking about their gender identity and their gender expression, and those are two different things. So if you're thinking you're seeing your child that was born your daughter and seems to be, acting like a boy, we have that tomboy kind of word for that. And that's well known in our culture. But what I want to ask the question, how do parents and caregivers recognize when a child might be actually struggling with some of these things? And what are some of the things that the parents can do? How can they broach this subject with their children, so to speak? So I'm just going to kind of toss that out there. And
here it comes. Somebody catch it.
Somebody catch that question. Okay. Go for it.
Go for it.
Let's be perfectly clear that I'm not perfect here. I lose my temper. I end up taking very angry walks around the block. And as much as I preach radical acceptance, sometimes it's hard to practice what the right answer is. So I will tell on myself here. As radically accepting as we try to be, and our family is very queer for multiple generations in multiple iterations. So let's be very clear that like my aunt of blessed memory was the biggest, butchest,
got an award for it.
Posthumously, Stonewall generation lesbian out in Cleveland, was a mental health therapist through the AIDS crisis, lived with her partner for 30 years. Like I grew up myself with my sibling coming out, my aunt being a lesbian, like it was in my family. It made it easier for me because it wasn't familially taboo. But even when Rin came out and said, I think I'm non-binary, I had to go through that same grieving process of this whole story I had in my head of who my kid was. Now, let's be clear. It was my story about who my kid was, not my kid's story about who they were. I had to go let all of that go. I had to go grieve that. I had to go deal with my own feelings and emotions and reactions. Thankfully, I was able to do that. And props to GLYS's transgender parent group for giving grownups a place to talk about it. They don't just support the kids. Because you guys were really helpful in just normalizing the fact that there are stages of grief that parents of trans kids experience that's ours to deal with. Don't put that on your kid. It's not your kids. Your kid is your kid is your kid. They're just telling you who they are. What you're grieving is the story you built up in your head about who you thought your kid was going to be. And now your kid's going to be somebody different. And that's cool. You get to have a new story. But you got to let go of the old one first.
Right.
Great
Such
advice.
a good point. Yeah.
Society sucks, and we all have narratives built into our heads about what people should be, and that projects onto other people.
So interesting that you interesting that you mentioned the word society, because we have a comment in the chat. It says, I'm 30 years old, and if I'm reading this correctly, I didn't come out until this date. I'm living with it, and it's my comfort zone now to stay in the closet. Please let us know how we can help and how I can be more in this society. Yeah, I think it's hard for people of various ages, but go ahead, Rin. If you have some advice for our 30-year-old.
Yes, I have some advice for our 30-year-old.
Okay.
Here are the basics of coming out. I did it a lot. 1, don't come out if you're not safe. You got to test the waters with stuff first, because if you're not safe, then you got to stay in the closet, which sucks. Once you've determined that you are safe or you're willing to deal within the parameters, you have to say an amount of screw it, because even if people are great, you got to get over some emotional hurdles, which are, oh my God, everything's getting end. And then it doesn't. And then you have to actually tell people. You have to go up to people and you have to be willing to answer their questions for because people have questions. It just happens. And then you move on from there. Maybe you're going to lose people. Maybe you're going to gain an entire community like I did. I know so many people now. And, you don't have to tell everybody. If you want to yell it from the street, like I do sometimes, I want to go on a roof and scream my identity sometimes. But there's also, hey, that person kind of sucks and doesn't need to know my business.
Exactly. Yes.
Coming out isn't opening a door. It's poking a bunch of holes in a piece of paper over and over.
Absolutely.
Aha.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a great
little
way
by
to sort
little.
of describe
so
it.
find that first hole to poke. And maybe it's your best friend, maybe it's not, maybe it's your sibling, maybe it's a parent, maybe it's an aunt, maybe it's an uncle. If you think about it, you kind of probably do know who that person is in your family, even though you might be kind of holding back and reticent about sharing. But once you share that first time, and then you don't die and they don't die,
the sun comes
then
up the
all
next
of a
day.
sudden the sun comes up the next day, and it makes it easier to go on with that, and then the next time and the next time.
Yeah.
And what you experience when you do come out is that all the power that people had over you because you weren't out goes away. So I've had
and then what does that do to your stress level? We're talking about how it affects your mental health. Immediately when you don't give someone else the power, your mental health, you have a better outlook. You have
I had someone call me once, and this goes back to the probably early 80s or the late 70s, and they said, I'm gonna tell your boss you're gay. And I laughed at them. I'm like, my boss knows that I'm gay, so that wouldn't go anywhere.
But I do know that there are still, even though we have laws in place, workplace harassment and everything, that there are still people who are employed or just don't want to share that part of their lives. And it does come from a place of fear, and that causes anxiety and stress. And so, what I want to say is, if you have questions or comments while we have this panel together, please put them in the chat. That's why we're here tonight. It's great for us to have this conversation, but it's so much more meaningful when we have everyone who's watching engage with us as well. And we can get to the nitty gritty of some of these things. We've got something on our list. Maybe we can go back to it just for a moment. Give me an example, Robert, of a microaggression.
Oh, so microaggressions are really interesting. And I think Vivian and Andy can tell us a little bit more about that. And this is something that, at least for us at GLYS, as we're learning about how people view these things. So microaggressions can be really negative things that cause a really negative reaction in an LGBTQ person, but that may also actually be unintended by the person saying it. And what we hear, for example, all the time when we do trainings are comments that echo this is a phase. So we hear that a lot. So it's like, I think, I might actually be a girl. well, all the kids are saying that now. It's probably a phase. And someone doesn't realize that that's something that really can cause a negative reaction in a person. And even the person themselves, they feel it and they don't know how seriously it affected them. So Andy or Vivian, if you could talk a little bit about that.
Vivian, do you want to go first?
Okay. The thing about microaggressions is we can stop them and we can kill them through increased awareness, because these are things that happen sometimes on a daily basis. And this is what the LGBTQ population has to go through, hearing some of these comments that are made unintentionally and intentionally. Because sometimes I do believe people have a sense of awareness. If nothing else, you can see the person's reaction and you've said something that has made them, uncomfortable. It could be about your dress, your preference of music, or what have you. How you express your authentic self can come into question. And so microaggressions are, I hate to say it, that, when Lynn was saying she thought that at this time period, the reaction to being LGBTQ would be different. It's the same thing as being African American, and then take that being African American and of the population also. So it's almost times 20, to deal with the microaggressions, what have you. So I just think it's about more awareness of these statements that are made, and people think that it's normal talk or something that they've heard and they've grown up with, and not knowing any better. But certain statements can be very stressful, very hurtful, very painful. And it is something that population has to deal with on a daily basis.
Yeah, and that's the amazing thing. It's on a daily basis. You see it, you hear it, and you learn to not react to it, because sometimes reacting to it is just not possible, and it's really the wrong thing to do unless you're maybe a superhero or something, and you can put on,
Robert,
don your cape and
reacting to it. You may spend your entire time period.
Like, that's a lot of energy.
Exactly. Negative energy at that.
Yeah, Rin wants to chime in here.
Go ahead, Rin.
So, since this is also a mental health panel, I would like to share something that happened a few days ago. Actually, it was yesterday. This happened yesterday in my English class. So we're discussing topics. We're going through Stephen King stuff. I asked my teacher to tell the trigger warnings for the piece we were going to be reading. She did. She's like, oh, there's some rapid language. It's just like, oh, yeah, there's discussions of X, but it's not that bad. Yeah. Cut to Andy.
Yeah, cut to Andy.
Yeah, cut to Andy.
Andy's got her head in her hand. She's got her hand in her head just like this, but she doesn't know what to think about that.
Yeah.
So I know what to think about that.
Okay.
That is such a perfect microaggression.
Exactly. Typical. Sad, but typical.
It's almost, they think that they're saying something positive. And, but it's not. It's saying that it's a bad thing, but it's not that bad, maybe, and yeah.
So, it makes me think about when someone is LGBTQ and they are receiving microaggressions, there are things that you can do. There are things that are in your control in terms of how you react to those microaggressions. But let's talk about if you have someone that you love, your child or a student or someone, how can someone educate themselves about what might be a microaggression or not, or how can they learn and sort of, change their behavior and then maybe their vocabulary.
Yeah, these things are so deeply seated and deeply ingrained in our society and our culture that it really is difficult. So we offer trainings at GLYS. We offer a free quarterly training. The next one is coming up in November. You can visit our website, which is glyswny.org/training. So it's pretty simple. And you can sign up for that training online, and we go through a lot of language and start talking about these things, like gender. What's the difference between gender expression? What's the difference between being gender queer and a non-binary person, for example? And we delve into those details, and we really try and create, at least for an hour or two, a place where people stop thinking about the world as a binary place, because that's at the root of a lot of this stuff, that somehow the world is either this or that. And if it's news to people, the world was never that way. The world was never a binary place. It's just a simple way we like to classify things. And so if we can get out of that box, we can really start seeing where some of those microaggressions come from.
And I think we see them in societal norms as well. Like we have a comment here that someone from the LGBT community says, I think marriage is an important topic with our community. Religious families, some religious families don't see our union as a marriage. When I came out, I was told that it's not the same as a heterosexual marriage. Okay, so seriously, I'm married, and I can tell you, it is just like everybody else's marriage. It is just like everybody else's marriage. And yet, that's one of those things where society has put this validation on a word like marriage. And for young people, I can even see that having an impact of people whose families, who have two moms, two dads, that kind of a thing. And so for young people viewing, let's hope that as you get older and you choose or don't choose to go into a union, that you don't have that stigma around it, but it's still there.
Right. Right. It's that being lesser than. It's like, well, this is the normal thing, and so you're not really normal, and that means that you're lesser than an actual person of a cisgender, as we say, person, or a heterosexual person, or whatever we consider the norm. And we've always had a very expansive human existence. We just didn't talk about it the way that we're talking about it now.
I think we have Allie and Andy who wanted to jump in. Yeah. Let's go to Allie.
To say, in regards to the norm is just society's story. And like any story, it can be revised. It just takes a whole lot of work. So part of what you do is you start telling different people's stories, whether it's mentally ill people's stories, LGBTQIA+ people's stories, people of color stories. You let those people tell their stories, and eventually they become part of society's story. So what we need to do, or at least what I feel we need to do, is we need to go out and we need to ask those people for their stories and accept that they aren't always going to want to share, but that doesn't mean their story doesn't exist.
So wise. So wise.
Yeah. I mean, at GLYS, we're always learning from the youth. We always say that. It's the youth that taught me that maybe my actual identity is genderqueer instead of cisgender. As I look at myself, through the long lens of time, I guess. So those, very wise and very important. And just telling your story is really one of the most powerful things that you can do, because when you're telling your story, you're not only empowering yourself, but you're empowering someone else who is there and listening to your story. And it can really be everything to that person. And we hope some of the people, listening tonight are experiencing that same thing.
We have folks saying, having a good support system is really important. A lot about acceptance, a lot about being able to share stories. I got chills from that explanation, Allie. Thank you. So true. Andy, did you want to add to that?
I wanted to go back to what you were saying, Lynn, when you were saying, well, my marriage, it is real. It is the same. And I started thinking, well, when I became a mom, when I became a parent, I adopted. And I tried putting on the Barry White and getting down just like everybody else, but guess what? Didn't work. Happened to be with artificial insemination, but guess what? Didn't work. So Barry didn't get me pregnant, but he got a lot of other people pregnant, and good on you, Barry. But when it came time for baby showers, my family of choice, my friends from work, my friends, brothers and sisters from other mothers, kind of, that is who came. I had 4 baby showers. Not a single baby shower was given for my child from relatives, people that were blood related. And that hurt. And, friends that have become married since legally in New York State, they were allowed to become married and get all those rights, those civil rights, have said, there's people that are choosing not to come to my wedding. Well, they're not getting an anniversary gift. I can tell you that. I wish I could take back the gift because it's not treated the same. Again, macroaggressions, the amount of stress. Part of my family of choice are my dogs and my cat.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah, Vivian.
I want to say, and Ren said this also, when I'm helping anyone of the population, LGBTQ, especially as an adult, and they don't have the support system or they're developing a support system, I always share with people that family is a gift, not a given. And so your family can be somebody new who you've met along this journey to become your authentic self. They can become your family because your biological family may turn their backs on you, but that doesn't mean you don't have supports out there or you can't achieve and develop new supports who may even be more supportive.
I think for young people, it takes a while to probably feel a sense of comfort with that, but that's one of the great things about your organization, right? You don't have clinicians on staff, but you provide a place for young people to go, an ear, an open and welcome environment, one that is accepting, and that you also work with parents and caregivers in a non-judgmental way.
Right.
I think that's really important as well. So if you're watching this right now and you're thinking, gosh, maybe, I've been having all these emotions around this issue or about this issue with my child, and I didn't know where to go and I didn't know what to do. What should their first step be?
Well, GLYS does provide community and then culture for people. And the parents that come to our parent groups, we have a general LGBTQ plus parent group. We have parent groups for transgender kids, and they visit with one another and support one another, and they find their own community, and they tell their stories, and they find out that someone else, lived a similar experience, and they can really support one another. So it's that kind of peer support that GLYS offers, as well as, letting them know that there are others in the community that have a culture. There's a history to the LGBTQ community, and it's a place where people can have real belonging as well in their lives.
Wow.
Can I say a quote?
Please do. Yeah, let's go to Andy.
I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this person's name right or not, so feel free to chime in. But I've always loved this quote by Anais Nin. And the day came when the risk to remain tight in a bud was more painful than the risk it took to blossom.
Wow. Yeah. Anais Nin was an author that when she wrote, people kind of thought what she was writing was pornography, and now we consider it literature. So that's how we evolve. We have people that, and the LGBTQ community and folks in it do this all the time. They're artists. They express themselves, and they express themselves in new ways that people haven't experienced before. And they're actually on the cutting edge, and people don't quite get it yet, but then they do, so it's writers like that move us forward. Thank you for that.
Wow. So it's 7:00. We're going to hang out just another minute or two, but I would love, for everyone to give the youth who we are trying to help and their loved ones, like a closing thought. We can head wherever you'd like to go first.
Yeah, let's just start with Vivian, and
we'll go from there.
Yeah.
My closing thought would be to reach out. If you need someone to talk to, reach out. And of course, I have to say my agency, we at Horizons, we strive to be a safe place to land. We service the population from 3 to adulthood and beyond. And you don't have to come in. We can talk to you over the phone if you don't want to come in, but just taking those baby steps. Nothing, you don't have to commit to anything, but just reach out and take those baby steps to just say what's in your heart, ask a question, and go from there.
Wow. That is really important, and it can be really powerful, if not easy. Andy, what are your closing thoughts?
You were just mentioning how a person was viewed to have written something as pornographic, and now it's literature, right? And I was thinking, I listened to the cover of Jolene from Dolly Parton by Lil Nas X, and was like, go get 'em. Was just so impressed. And again, going back to that intersectionality that we were kind of sharing and talking a bit about earlier. I mean, that term was coined 30 years ago by Kimberly Crenshaw, 30 years ago, and we're still working on it. So, there's the Trevor Project, there's HRC, there's GLYS, there's mental health associations, NAMI. Like, reach out. That just talk to at least one person. Find one person.
Yes. Good point, Andy. Yeah.
Thank you. So I think We're at Jennifer, Rin, and Ellie, and I think we're gonna save Rin for the very last because I think Rin's gonna send us out with maybe something to think about for the rest of the evening. I'm not putting too much pressure on you here.
Don't worry, Rin, I'll officially close us out, but we may give you the final word before I officially close us out.
So Jennifer, let's.
Yeah, go ahead, Jennifer.
Wow, pressure, because my brain went completely blank. So I'm going to close with, you may not know what to do, and you may not have the right answer, but take whatever step you're going to take out of genuine love. If it's love for yourself, if it's love for your kid, if it's love for your family, because that place of genuine love, that radical acceptance, that's going to be your guiding light when you can't figure out what else the right answer is. It's that non-conditional love. We'll go back to good old Carl Rogers. It's that unconditional positive regard. It's that unconditional love. I'm not going to demand you be a certain way to love you. I'm just going to love you however you are. And then we're going to figure it out together.
So for not knowing what to say, that was an amazing thing to say.
Allie?
Yeah, Allie.
I'm just gonna say, live your story and tell it where you can, and don't let anyone tell you how to live or tell your own story, and make sure you don't tell anyone else how to live or tell their own story. Just listen and live.
Listen, thank you.
Very nice. Very nice.
And Rin.
Hello, I'm important. Can you notice I've been masking this whole time?
Go ahead.
You have to make active decisions in your life. I've gone through this whole thing, I came out, I'm having horrible mental health. Oh, I can do things about that. I did the whole brain stuff, and now I've got bad moments, but overall I give myself compliments all the time. It's great. Highly recommend getting to this point. You have to come to terms with the fact that society sucks. But you got to unlearn all that stuff. It's a process. It's never going to end. But doing it makes life so much better. You just gotta love yourself radically. Be queer. Have fun. Don't let idiots tell you what to do.
Thank you
Good
so
advice.
much. Very good advice. I think I'm going to take that advice, actually.
Okay. And how about you, Robert?
Well, contact GLYS, learn more about GLYS. If you don't know about GLYS, go to our website, look at all the things we do. Our calendar is at the bottom of our homepage. You'll see our groups, you'll see our activities. Some things are in person again. Some things we're still online as we hover in this COVID haze or whatever you want to call where we are right now. But we're there for you. You can send us a little message in a little box if you want to. You can find our email addresses and email us. You can pick up the phone and call us. We'll do that. We'll set up a Zoom meeting with you if it's the first time that you've talked to someone. We are happy to be there for you.
Great advice. A couple of my takeaways from the evening, and then I'll take us out, is radical acceptance. Feeling like you're in a safe place, reaching out, taking a first step, and sharing your story. What we do here at Buffalo Toronto Public Media, and certainly as a part of the WBFO Mental Health Initiative, is tell stories, share stories. And it is I think, the most efficient and impactful way to change the narrative, right? We talked about changing what society knows and understands and accepts. And just coming together tonight to have these conversations. We so appreciate everyone on the panel joining us tonight, all of you joining us on YouTube, giving us your thoughtful insight on the subject as well. The news director at WBFO, Dave Debo, he came in just before we started and said, please let people know that we continue to reach out to the community for stories on mental health and mental illness and everything around this initiative. So you can go to WBFO.org and get Dave Debo's information. He'd be glad to talk to you about a story idea if you have one. And, I want to thank the Patrick P. Lee Foundation, because none of this would have been possible without their steadfast support of the mental health initiative and their underwriting. And really for all of you to engage in this kind of a conversation remotely, virtually. Yes, we are sort of in this pandemic world. And we may be here for some time or we may not, but what we have found is a new way to connect. And that is here doing events like this. So, I bid you all wellness and safety and love in your lives. And we thank you so much for joining us.
Take care, everyone. Good night.